Thanks, Karen. So before we kind of kick off, we must admit that this is a little bit strange. Usually we're used to being in front of people and seeing the whites of your eyes and your body language and all of that good stuff. So if at any point we seem a bit weird, just bear in mind that we're kind of talking into the void right now. So who knows what's going to happen. And one more thing that I wanted to say before we kick off is that we'd really like to ask you what you need to be present right now. So have you got too many tabs open? Are your notifications distracting you? Is there a tasty snack in your eye line that you want to grab? If so, grab the snack, shut down your emails, close your tabs, and take this hour to be here and present with us, if you can.
Awesome. So as Matt said, it's so nice to meet you all, albeit sort of one-sided at the moment. But yeah, it's great to meet you. We appreciate that, like us, this might be your 100th Zoom call of the week. So we appreciate you taking the time out of your Friday to join us. It's great to see so many people. And as Karen said, the fact that you're interacting with us right now really helps. So keep that up throughout it. As Nat said, usually we'd be running these workshops in person, and this is very strange for us. We run off the energy of being engaging with people, seeing faces, seeing people's emotions, body language, and all of that. So we hope we can bring some interactivity into this session so that you feel part of it. And we've got some sort of rules of engagement coming up shortly. Before we get into that though, we sort of thought we'd start the interactivity with an icebreaker. Now, originally, we had planned this to be a normal Zoom session, so we could see a few of your faces and see where you are and all of that kind of good stuff. But sort of that original icebreaker wasn't really going to work. Also, it was called Post-it Peekaboo. So certainly, I think a couple of people on the line here will actually recognise that. We also realised it sounded a little bit dodgy, maybe. So instead, we went for a hands up hoedown.
Which doesn't sound dodgy at all.
So bear with us on this one. You might have noticed we love a bit of alliteration. But basically what we want you to do with this, hopefully in the bottom bar of your screen, you'll see a raise hand icon that's next to the chat icon. So just have a look to see if you can see that there.
Raise their hand. Yep. People are raising their hand. Wow, this is really.
So each time we ask you a question that is relevant to you, put your hands up. So by clicking that icon, it's basically giving us an indication that this is relevant to you. So let's have a go at this. First of all, who here has heard of service design before? Got some hands up there?
This is amazing. It's covering my whole screen.
I don't think I'm seeing that actually, Nat. So I'll feel it through your vibes on that one. Who here is a service designer? Who here is joining us from Europe? And we'll include the UK in that. Who is joining from farther afield today? Have we got many there, Nat, coming through?
We've got a few.
Because I'm conscious the team, they can't actually see
who's
them. So, who has had enough of Zoom calls this week?
Oh, we've got loads. Loads!
And who here is thinking about their next snack? It's definitely me. It's always me at the moment.
We've got as many people looking forward to their next snack as too many Zoom calls, so that's good.
Awesome. And also, who here is either a friend or relation of Nat's? Quite a few.
Hey, I recommend inviting all of your friends and family to your work thing so you don't have to explain it all the time. I just wanted to pick up on a question from the chat. So a few of you have asked if we can see each other. Because we've set this up as a webinar, it's not like a normal Zoom call. So because it's essentially we have to have less people to be able to have everyone's videos on. So unfortunately, and we're gutted about this, we can't see your wonderful faces, but you can see ours, and hopefully that's not too bad.
Awesome, thanks for participating in that. it was sort of really important for us to at least feel that we're engaging with you somewhat, but also please continue to use the chat here as well, just so we can sort of keep those interactions going. Over to you, Nat.
Cool. So every good talk starts with some expectations for you, our lovely audience. And so here are yours for today. So we'll start off by telling you who the hell we are and who Spark is. We'll explain what service design is and why we think that you should care. We'll share some hopefully simple tips to bring back to your day job. And finally, hopefully we'll have time if we don't keep banging on, but we'll let you grill us at the end and ask us any questions that you might have. Sound okay, Liz?
Yeah, I'm doing this on behalf of everyone else.
Raised hands. Fabulous, thank you. I really appreciate that.
Awesome. So before we get into it, we feel it's only right to have some rules of engagement. Yes. We're control freaks, and if you've been to any of our workshops, you know we love a good rule. A fun one, mind, but please don't break them. We're very strict about that. So when it comes to our rules of engagement, as Nat mentioned before, it's time to be present and get rid of any distractions. So if you can, just being totally present in this space, switching off notifications and just taking this hour to focus in here would be awesome. Give us a +1 in the chat if something we say resonates. Also, this is the first time we're doing this virtually, so it's good to get additional feedback. If you feel it's necessary, we can also add maybe a 0 or a -1. We can feel that emotional journey through the process. We can take it.
Too many -1s, that's savage.
No. We'll see if any come through. And then finally, if you see this icon at the bottom here, then it's time for an activity. So this will be when we're asking you to do something, hence Nat's request earlier, especially if you missed it and you're just joining, to essentially grab a piece of paper and a pen just to note some things down.
Thanks, we've got our first +1. Thank you, Stuart. Okay, so we said that we would start off by telling you who we are. So I am Nat, and this is Alicia. So now you know who's who. And for some reason, we thought it would be cool to introduce each other. I'm not sure why we did that, but hey, that's what we plan to do. So Alicia's going to kick us off, and she's going to introduce me.
Yeah, we took this risk into our own hands. So this is Nat. Nat is a super talented strategist and service designer who has an innate skill of making even the toughest of strategy challenges fun and engaging. She's our head of culture at Spark, and this is because she's really awesome with people, and she puts people at the center of everything she does and makes them feel really fab. It's true. Her superpower is really our facilitation. If any of you have been in one of Nat's workshops before, you'll know what I mean by that. Super engaging, super high energy, and we hope that some of that can come across today as well. She's a great storyteller, and most importantly, she's great on the dance floor as well. Now, one final fun fact I'll add in that Nat won't be aware of is the fact she's recently developed a penchant for wearing socks with her Birkenstocks because she thinks it's a really strong look that you won't be able to see on this call.
Wow, it's all coming out now, isn't it?
I've got fans who agree with that though. You've got some real +1s coming through.
Thank you. Oh, -1, we've got a -1.
-2.
Karen, that's not fair. Thank you for those lovely words, Alicia, I really appreciate it. So Alicia is the most talented and inspiring service designer who I've had the pleasure of working with. And she has a truly impressive background as well, from working in startups through to launch, to working at the Design Council for some time too. I would say that her superpowers are reading between the lines and understanding deeper meanings behind organizational problems. And she's an excellent coach and mentor as well for anyone who's fortunate enough to have that relationship with her. And she really knows how to bring a team together and to gather around a common goal. And it's safe to say that I've learned a lot from Alicia, and I continue to do so each day. But one of my favorite things is she taught me how to create a candle flame out of Post-its, so that when we have a birthday in Spark and we're not allowed to light the candles, we can still make it feel that way. And that was one of my favorite things.
Thanks, Nat. There's always a use of Post-its. And also just a caveat, I didn't pay Nat to say that, so it's really kind.
You'll see on this slide that we've added our Twitter and Instagram handles. So do feel free to add us if you want to get in contact afterwards. And if you're lucky, maybe we'll make some salient points. You might want to reshare them or do whatever it is you do. So feel free to tag us and all of that good stuff. And I'll just leave that up while you're frantically trying to find us on your social media.
This is going to be awkward because I think he just wants to get more than 50 followers. So if you could follow on Twitter, that'd be
That is so rude. Okay, moving swiftly on. As you've heard, Alicia and I are both from a company called Spark. There's our lovely logo there. And we call ourselves a design and innovation consultancy. Essentially, we're made up of a group of thinkers, researchers, strategists, designers, innovators, and more than anything else, we are real doers. But what's really interesting about us is that we're born out of a technology consultancy, which is BGSS. Hopefully, many of you have heard of them and you've been to some of their events already. They're sponsoring the Leeds Digital Festival this year. And the reason that that's cool is because it means that as a design company, we don't just design amazing things, but we have the capability to deliver them too, which is fab. And the final thing that I wanted to say about Spark is that our purpose is really to make positive change. And with this, we believe in the power of creativity, people-centric design, and that is our kind of avenue to help us explore new opportunities and embrace the unknown and ambiguous world, which is of course very relevant in the days that we're currently in. And I guess, but to summarize all of that, we like to just say that we're here to help make technology serve people better. But enough about that, because that's not why we're here, is it, Alicia?
No, it's not. So as stated in our event description, we really believe that everyone can and should think like a service designer. Now, you're probably thinking, of course, we're going to say that we are service designers and everyone should be part of our gang, but there are some really instrumental tools and techniques that could be beneficial to anyone. As actually one of our colleagues, Paul Bailey, demonstrated yesterday is in Design Thinking Dad. So I'd highly recommend you check out that talk. But before we venture further into how to think like a service designer, we thought it was really important to dig into some of these definitions because it can all get quite, tied up in jargon, and actually we wanted to break some of that down. So to make sure we're all on the same page, we thought that even before we got to service design, we would talk about what we mean by a service. And I think you'll agree, Nat, that this was probably the simplest slide that we spent the most time discussing and chatting about, didn't we?
Yeah, it's quite surprising that as service designers, we really struggled to articulate what a service was. But luckily, we had Google for that. And when we searched Google, you commonly get up the economics term for a service, which is a service is a transaction where no physical goods are transferred from buyer to seller, which is, a good definition, very traditional, a little bit boring, but hey, who am I to judge? But there is something in this that's worth talking about, in that in this context, goods are tangible and consumable, such as pens and sunglasses and shoes and all that kind of good stuff. Whereas services are intangible and they don't end up in you owning something, like a medical treatment or a postal service, public transport and banking, all of that kind of stuff. And that all remains true. However, in today's terms, there's no longer a clear distinction between goods and services. And that's because a lot of goods and services, or products and services is what we say more often now, tend to overlap, which means most companies end up in this blurry middle ground where they're part goods and part services, or the two are kind of facing off to each other in some way. So a nice example of this is to take an example of a song. So like a MP3 file. That's a product that you can access through a service like Spotify or Apple Music, but to the listener, the difference between owning and streaming is pretty null. They might as well be identical, but behind the scenes, the two things are quite different. And this is where how we feel that actually the old kind of description of a service isn't as relevant anymore. And we imagine that going forward, it will continue to kind of devalue. So we thought long and hard about this, and we were like, okay, well, how would we define what a service is? So this is what we came up with. We said that a service is a collection of tangible and intangible elements that create a relationship between you as the customer or the user and an organization. So I guess to put this into a context that we're all familiar with, and actually something that we're hugely grateful for if we think about the NHS. So the NHS provides us with a medical service that includes booking appointments through potentially a mobile app, which is a product, visiting your doctor, collecting prescriptions, which we pay for, many of us pay for. So this is a mix of products and services, but overall the NHS is a service that provides you with medical care. And that's where service designers get really excited. So now that we're clear on what we think a service is, we're going to talk about service design.
Awesome. And we've still got everyone with us. Everyone's all good. Adam's just put a great thing in there around sort of an article, I think, or a book, isn't it, around those distinctions between tangible and intangible. So that looks really interesting. Definitely going to check that one out. But yeah, thanks, Nat. Leading into what that means for us into sort of defining service design. It basically is this statement here of service design is the process of creating experiences that meets the needs of customers while also creating that all-important value for businesses. So it's all about bringing together brilliant user experiences with the crucial people, processes and systems that are all required to support them. So if we continue with the NHS, for example, this means looking at both the experience that you would experience as a patient, which is what we like to call the front stage, as well as considering the appointment scheduling, medical records, administration, all of that stuff that takes place sort of backstage or behind the scenes, the stuff that's not necessarily visible, but you feel, and is essentially, it's all about bringing those two elements together. Now, you'll probably notice that we use these terms of front stage and backstage a lot in service design. So we've got this nice analogy for you. So if you imagine you're in a concert and you're in the audience and you can see the singer, the performer on the stage. To make all of that happen, there's a lot that's happening backstage. There's the lighting, the sound, everything that's making Rod Stewart look great. I don't know why I went for Rod Stewart there.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
I've learned something new. Again.
That's been recorded as well. Good. Any for Rod? Yeah, good. I'm not alone. Cool. So back to this. In terms of that backstage, some minus ones. In terms of that backstage, it's really about, that's what's making the experience happen. That lighting, all of that kind of pulls it together. But there's a behind the scenes that sits there as well. There's the budget constraints, the legal team, the culture code, all of that stuff that is basically that supporting infrastructure that's not seen, but is really fundamental to a business existing. Now, we're going to take it to another level of granularity, and bear with us, but this is really for the design nerds that are out there as well, which that is us. So we like to indulge ourselves with this. But basically, if this is your bag and you are one of those design nerds, please give us a +1 so we know we're not alone in getting into this level of detail right now.
Emma and Lou have given us a raised hand, and we've got loads of +1s coming in. Oh, we've got a couple of more. Whoop, whoop.
Woo! Excellent. We're in good company. Hopefully this will all kind of come together and make sense. So essentially, this is how service design basically differs from other design practices. It's about the level of granularity you're looking at. So if we think, for example, like graphic design, it's going to be more granular as it focuses more on the pixels, the symbols, and everything to create those beautiful visual communication tools. Whereas service design attempts to look across entire ecosystems and the network. So it's just that more holistic view. But equally, all of those design practices work together and are often all considered at some point during the service design process. And it's really key to tie all those together as well. So what are the benefits of all this? This is all, fancy language, different analogies, but what does it actually mean in terms of using and thinking like a service designer? Well, really, it's about being really people-focused and bringing the whole team's attention around this as well. It's focused on the needs of people, the products, the processes, partners, and also certainly something that's really big for me and Nat is the planet as well. Lots of P's there, but let's be focused around those P's as well. It removes subjectivity from decision making. So you've got fact there, you've kind of brought together all the evidence, and it stops those back and forth conversations. It prevents those numerous Zoom calls, because everyone knows what they're basing their work around and where their focus lies. It creates that culture for creativity and collaboration. It breaks down those silos. So instead of different groups working on different things, it's more cross-functional and collaborative. And it's all built on that sort of trust as well, of knowing the direction you're heading in. And it creates the environment to experiment, to learn, and continuously improve really quickly and basically cost effectively as well, because there's some really cool techniques in which you don't have to spend lots of money to learn really quickly. And it doesn't matter the size of the task at hand as well. And because of all the above, it increases the likelihood of project success. And we've got proof, which we'd like to bring to life now for you. Nat.
Thank you. So the first example that we want to give is from a project that Alicia and I recently worked on. So it's one of the big 4 media and broadcast companies in the UK. And their technology team had a big ambition. They wanted to move from an operationally focused, like tech support type team, into one that's actually more proactive and can lead their company to be one of the most technically advanced media companies in their industry. So to help them do that, we took a service design approach, obviously. And we got them talking and empathizing with their colleagues around the business that they're supporting, which meant immersing them in studios and production and news and all of this great stuff. They had a great time. The 2 of us bloody loved it, and were probably a little bit gutted that we weren't asked to join one of their shows, but whatever, I'm still checking the post daily for that.
One day, Nat, one day.
One day. But that's not something to be sniffed at, because actually these people were used to kind of hiding behind their screens, if you like. But now they were actually out in the open and seeing what it's like to work in studios themselves. And this helped them to start thinking about the real opportunities for improvement rather than just fixing things all the time. So it was a kind of mindset shift there. And by using the service design techniques that we taught them and involving lots of people, so from leadership team all the way through to tech support and other people around the business, they started to think much more holistically and in a joined up way, rather than just thinking about their standalone teams or their products that they're working on. So rather than designing and just rolling things out independently, they started to think from like an end-to-end employee experience and what technology is needed to support that, which was awesome. But I think the thing that Alicia and I were most proud of as a result of this was that they saw the benefits so much that by the end of the project, they defined their mission. So bear in mind, this is a technology team, but they defined their mission as to put people, empathy, and research at the heart of everything they do. Now, that you would expect that from a design team, right? Or like your customer experience team, but it's maybe a little bit rarer to have that as a mission statement for a technology team. So that was really something that we walked away and gave ourselves a little pat on the back.
Yeah, that was such an awesome project. And I think it actually made us quite emotional at times, Nat, didn't it? When we saw those moments.
I get choked up every time I say it.
We love all that stuff. And I think it's also really important to kind of caveat that team, there was quite a big team on that project. And I think it's really important to talk about that, because we don't all have the budgets to bring in service design and research. It can be, you know, something that startups or SMEs don't have the budget for. And so that's just something that I wanted to share with you as well from my experience working in startups. So essentially, this is kind of a few years ago now, but I was heading up the marketing team for an early stage startup. And the premise of it was all about hands-free high street shopping, essentially a retail delivery service that delivered your shopping from store to door in the same day. So you didn't have to carry your shopping bags. I know what you're thinking, sort of first world problems, but you know, it was there was a lot that kind of went into that concept, and I can share that at another time with you. But in 6 months, we had to develop, rebrand, launch, and roll out the service in central London, working with some of the world's biggest retailers. And we were small, like we were a team smaller than sort of 20 people, and that was across marketing, account management, development, the whole thing. So basically, we had a lot of pressure on us. We couldn't mess it up. And to make sure we didn't, we put the shopper and the retailers at the center of everything that we did. We'd bring customers into the morning sessions, into our morning meetings. We'd troubleshoot with them. We'd make sure that the whole team were there, the marketing team, the developers, the account managers, the ops team, so that we were all, it was highly visible what the customer was thinking and doing in that environment, but also our partners as well. We were all involved in the customer service. In fact, we were the customer service team. So we were picking up the calls, we were checking in feedback on the app, and that was in the really early stages at that point, just so that we could get that constant feedback from the users and feed that into our plans. And bearing in mind we had that 6-month timeline, it was really important that that was a really iterative approach. And so every week changes were being made and we were trying stuff out. We were failing a lot. We were a startup, that happens a lot. But just because we were doing it all together and we were co-located together, we were collaborating together, it meant that we were driving success far faster. And you know, I'm pleased to say that the service is still in existence now and overseas as well, keeping up those ways of working as well. So you can do it on a big and small scale as well. And this is essentially what kind of we want to discuss with you now, of how you can do that.
Didn't you say that you even had developers picking up calls from customers?
Yeah.
That's like one of my favourite things about this story. I had to just mention that. That's fabulous. Okay, so that's probably enough in terms of context. Let's talk about how you can do it yourself. Now, I want to caveat this before we go into the next phase, because Alicia and I actually do service design boot camps, which can be anything from like 2 days to like 2 weeks. And obviously we don't have the time right now to go through everything and anything, unless anyone wants to swap their afternoon plans. Silence. Oh, stick around after, we can chat all day. But we haven't, don't worry, we're not putting you into a boot camp, but if you are interested, speak to us afterwards. But with that in mind, we only have a limited amount of time here. So what we've tried to do is keep it high level and share some tips that are about shifting your mindset towards a service design way of thinking. But don't worry, like one of our things that we plan to do after this is to write a blog where we can actually link you to tools and templates. So it can be a little bit more actionable. Cool, so let's get on with it. First things first, it's important to know that all good designers start with a framework. And let me tell you that there are plenty. All you need to do is search design thinking, service design, UX, all of that good stuff into Google, our friend, and you'll find more frameworks than you can shake a stick at. But there's one framework, we think, that rules us all in the design world, and it's this one. Anyone on the chat want to shout it out? Come on, you know what it is. Double diamond, double diamond. Oh, yeah. It is indeed one of the design community's absolute faves, the double diamond. So all the designers on the call will be super familiar with this one, but for those that aren't, it's a 4-stage process that starts with understanding people and defining the problem or opportunity space, followed by coming up with lots of ideas based on this, and then designing and concepts and developing them into something that you can then test with real people. And the reason that it's a diamond shape is that it's a series of diverging and going broad with research, and then converging to make sense of what you found and narrow in on where you should focus your efforts. So that's a bit of detail around the shapes. And it's worth also mentioning that this is an approach spread across all design practices. It's certainly not specific to service design. But if we change this up a little bit, then we can start to see what the service design take on this. So if you bear with me, I don't know what the animations is going to look like on your end, but humour me. So if we turn this blue, and then what about if we add in a waterline? Can anyone tell what this is yet?
Any guesses?
Yes. As you all know, when it comes to service design, it's about going below the surface and understanding the people, processes, and systems that are all involved in creating and delivering an experience. So we wanted to repurpose the classic iceberg analogy here because we think it actually visualizes it really well. And I added this to the slide just in case none of you knew what it was, but you are all over it. it's an iceberg. So now what we're going to do is break it down a little bit, and this is where we're going to share some tips and simple activities. So over to you, Alicia.
Thank you. I'm enjoying the appreciation for the iceberg slide, by the way. I think, yeah, there's some great feedback coming through there. I like the one about Titanic there. So maybe we'll pick up on that analogy shortly. Okay, so we're going to go through the 4 sections of the double diamond and tell you a bit more about each part of it. But also we're going to we've created some tips for you to take home with you as well. So with this in mind, we're going to kick off with discover. So with this part here is essentially often the part that's most overlooked. People often don't think that they need to go and speak to their customers or employees because they think they know it all. We've all done it. Like, we always have to sort of check ourselves to make sure we're not sort of making those assumptions. And because doing that and not talking to your employees, your colleagues, your customers is one of the biggest mistakes and where we tend to go wrong. Now, at this point, I should pause because I know Nat has a favourite saying for this, don't you, Nat?
Yeah, I obviously didn't make this saying up, like, you all know it, but it is a good one and it's relevant in this context. And that is, never assume it makes an ass out of you and me. You're welcome.
I'm just going to see what the response is to that for a minute. Mixed response. So, moving on swiftly, the discover phase is all about understanding what is going on in people's heads, what the problem is, or what we prefer to say are the opportunities. So essentially, that's about understanding people, their behaviours, their motivations, their emotional drivers, and really spending time with people to understand what that looks like. And basically, there's lots of ways and techniques to do this as well. There's observation, immersion. You have to be careful not to be too creepy, but essentially immersing yourself in their worlds and putting yourself in their shoes. But essentially, you can try all of this out. But first and foremost, it's about having a conversation, which sounds like the most simple thing, but it all comes down to that all-important element of empathy. So right now, we're just going to have a quick check-in on your empathy skills. So grab your piece of paper or whatever you have to hand. You might even be Post-it notes if you're sort of from the design world and you can't let go of the Post-its, even in lockdown. But what we want you to do is spend a couple of minutes just thinking about a friend, family member, or your partner. It might be someone you're living with or in lockdown at the moment, and write down what you think they're feeling and thinking about in this lockdown situation.
Alicia, apologies for not changing the slide quick enough. I was distracted by the chat.
It is very distracting, but in the best way possible.
I'm a little bit hurt about the comments on my saying, but
I like the reference to David Brent.
Yeah.
Is there a groan icon? No, but we should create one.
Thankfully not.
There needs to be some form of like lift music here or something like that. But instead, I'm going to move us on because we've only got an hour. But hopefully you've had a chance to jot down some thoughts. Nat, did you have anything that sort of came to mind with that? Any particular thoughts or feelings?
So if I think about my partner, I actually think he's quite happy in lockdown. He likes being on his own. He's in the other room right now, probably listening to me say this. I think that maybe the challenge is for him is probably not being able to be as active as he would like and go to the gym and work out and that kind of thing.
Well, that kind of takes us on nicely to our tip, because it is all about don't take everything at face value. Understand what people are thinking, feeling and doing. And I think he might have actually just responded in the chat. But with that in mind, there's sort of an additional tip to not taking everything at face value. We wanted to add this in because sometimes you only have a very short amount of time with people to speak to them. And so sometimes it can just even be the way that you actually structure your conversation and the way that you engage with people. So with that in mind, I'm just going to try something out with Nat here now. So, hi Nat, is your day going okay?
Yes.
Have you had lunch?
Yes.
Was it delicious?
No.
Oh, did you not have time to make a nice lunch today?
I was just reheating.
Whew. I don't know about you, but that felt a bit awkward. So So thanks, Nat. I'm going to try it a different way. So, hi, Nat. How are you today?
Well, I'm good, thank you, Alicia. How are you?
Yeah, really good. How was your lunch?
It was all right. Luckily, I had some stuff in the fridge, but you know, doesn't beat making something fresh.
Oh, tell me more about that. What do you like to make?
I really like to make fresh pasta with spinach and tomatoes. That's one of my favourite lunch meals.
And why is that?
Well, it just feels hearty, and you know, if I'm going to work out in the afternoon, it kind of sets me up for a good sesh.
Awesome. Thanks, Nat. So I asked Nat the same amount of questions there, but look at the difference in the conversation and what I managed to understand. And Kieran's articulated it really nicely there as well. Open-ended questions versus close-ended awkwardness. And I think that's really kind of important, even in your day-to-day interactions, just opening up those questions a bit more, and you can uncover so much more, whether it's conversations with your colleagues, your teammates, or it's actually encouraging some of your frontline staff and your customer service to talk in those ways a bit more as well. So that's Discover. On to the next part.
On to part 2 of the first diamond. Through being super empathetic, you've spoken to people and you now understand their challenges and hopefully some of the stuff that isn't visible to the human eye. Now it's time to spot those opportunities. And there's lots of ways to do this, like various techniques for spotting patterns. We do a lot of journey mapping where we map out the steps that a customer or a user is doing. Creating personas, using templates to narrow in and prioritize your focus areas. But one of the most important things that we like to do is to frame our findings in a way that helps us understand what someone's goal is. And that way we can look at creative ways to help someone reach that goal rather than only fixing problems. And a good template for this is something called jobs to be done. And I'm sure many of the designers on the call again will be familiar with this, but this helps us to articulate a problem in the following way. So you say, what is the situation? What's the motivation? And what's the outcome? And I've got an example for you here. So let's think about Alicia. So when Alicia is working at home in a 1-bed flat, which is the situation, she wants to be able to create an environment for work and downtime, her motivation, so that she can work and relax in the same space, the outcome. By articulating challenges in this way, it opens us up to more opportunities and ideas in the later stages. So again, we want to try this out with you. Now here's another activity. Now we want you to think about the person that you thought about last time and write down what is the most important thing that they need right now, and most importantly, why. And do feel free to use the situation, motivation, outcome format. And if you're brave enough, do pop your answer in the chat as well. We'd love to see what some of you are writing down.
It's that kind of lift music thing that needs to be there. I'm not going to sing the whole way through.
I think you should. Time and space for herself. Yeah, very good.
I think Adam's made an interesting point around the process here. So I think it's important to highlight that some of these areas we aren't necessarily doing how we would do it as a full end-to-end activity. And so some of the tips and templates we can share afterwards will guide you through that as well.
A really interesting comment from David about getting the kids adopted. Oh, there's some nice ones coming through about some of our parents potentially feeling a little bit helpless. Yeah, I'm sure many of us. Yeah, we're looking for support and understanding. Oh, a few of us wanting to take care of parents, even though there's distance between us. Thank you for sharing those. In terms of our tip from this phase, our second tip of the day to help us think more like a service designer is to not just think about customers' challenges, but to think about what your customer is trying to achieve. And bear in mind, these tips that we're giving you are very much about mindset. So for many of you, they might be really obvious if you're in this space, but for others, and particularly for people that we tend to work with, this isn't as obvious as it might seem. Again, if you want more detail and tools and templates, we'll be coming at you with a blog soon.
So I think there's been some really good things raised in the chat here as well, in terms of going beyond just what people are saying, but it's further research to get to the real root of that. And that's something that you keep checking in throughout the whole process as well, using some of those different ways of working and tools and techniques. Now we're in the half of the double diamond that's all about creating ideas and turning them into concepts as well. It's really important at this point that you're working with people who are from diverse backgrounds and experiences, because it just really kind of opens up you to so much potential for different ideas that come into this as well. I think we've probably all been part of brainstorming sessions in the past, and there are lots of different techniques to come up with ideas. But that's not the part we're actually going to talk about here. It's actually how you frame those sessions. So it's even before you start getting to coming up with those ideas and building on those. We wanted to say that actually the framing is the most important part. And that's where our favourite part of the how might we comes in as well. It's basically that powerful tool that takes your insights and flips them into a short question, which helps you start thinking about those new solutions. So taking your evidence, which should be done from your data that you've gathered from speaking to a multitude of people, and then taking those into what are those goals that they're trying to achieve, and then starting to flip them into those how might we's as well. So in terms of what that looks like, if we think about the previous job to be done that we looked at, so when I'm working from home in my one-bed flat, I want to be able to create an environment for work and downtime, and it's because I want to be able to relax and work in the same space. By articulating the challenge in this way, we can then flip that into this how might we statement of how might we create space for both work and relaxation whilst I'm in lockdown. So we wanted to go not too broad, but not too focused, so we were leaving enough space for opportunity to come up with innovative ideas and solutions. That moves us on to our next activity. So if we think, like you did before, about that previous activity, this time think about a challenge that you personally face while working from home. Now, I know this isn't taking your existing data, but we just want to use some of that mindset to get into this way of thinking. And then take that sort of challenge that you're facing and turn it into an opportunity by framing it as a how might we. And again, we'd really appreciate if you could share that in the chat with us as well. We'd love to know if we've got some of those common challenges that we're all facing at the moment.
How might we open communication channels and make sure everyone is on the same page? That's a good one. How might we make space for more movement during the working week? How might we prevent distractions? Yeah, big time. Tell me about it. I get distracted by the sun, just the sun being out. I can stare at it for a long time. Thanks, Anastasia. How might we be motivated to work when it's so warm outside? Yes, Steph. Oh God, they're coming in quite quick now.
How might we limit how much we eat? Lucy, I'm with you.
How might we find time to make nice lunches?
Jamie.
Yes. Balance homeschooling and work. I'm sure many people are feeling the same with that. How might we hide from the kids? Very good.
These are really great, and keep them coming through as well. I think there's some really great challenges here. And something that we could all take away as designers as well. So our top tip for this one is really thinking about, well, thinking like this, like an entrepreneur, and framing those problems as opportunities. We can get very bogged down by all these challenges and the pain points, but really it's saying, okay, what is this opportunity? By using that positive language and opening it up to think like an entrepreneur. Often we get too bogged down in that, in sort of those challenges, whereas an entrepreneur sees the opportunity. So that's sort of our tip for you, to think more like that.
And use how might we's to help you do that. We can all think like an entrepreneur with those. Finally, we get to develop, which is perhaps the more complex of the previous stages. At this stage, you should have a few ideas that you will want to put back in front of people to see if they would work and if they are actually solving some of the problems that you identified at the beginning. As always, there's many ways to do this, from visioning, where you're visualizing what the future could look like, storyboarding, which I think many of us did back at school, but bringing it back and looking at how the steps fit together. Prototypes, which is creating quick and dirty version of your products or services. Anything from using paper to pipe cleaners and Lego is another favorite. But one of our favorite tools as service designers is what's called the service blueprint. And this is where you take an idea and you look front stage, backstage, and behind the scenes, which allows us to truly test our idea, both from the perspective of will people like it, but also is it actually going to work? And you need to understand all of these components, so then you'll know what it will take to make something a reality. And it sounds quite fancy sometimes when we talk a lot about this, and I do think that we're at risk sometimes as service designers to make them quite complicated. I think it's safe to say that. But if I'm honest, and you break this down to its simplest form, it's an organized list of everything that's involved in the service that you're creating. And I know that I'm probably going to offend a couple of service designers there, so please be kind. Okay, so on that note, on to our last activity. I'd like you to think about one thing you'd like to change about your home working environment. So you'll probably have some ideas from the last activity. And make a quick list of all the things that are needed to make that change happen. So you might write down things that you can do, or you might need some support from companies or organizations or even other people that you might know that have the capability to help you make this change. There could also be technology that's involved to help you. Just make a quick list of what comes to mind, and that would be fab. Oh, thanks, Rebecca. I like your how might we there.
Yeah, I'm just reading through all of these, some really good ones. I think it's your turn to sing now, Nat.
No one wants that. I can like dance in a kind of expressive way. Okay, so on to our final tip for thinking more like a service designer. Thanks for liking the dancing. I can do some more at the end, actually. I have an interpretive flow that I'm more than happy to put out there. Anyway, on to our last tip. So always cover all of your bases by looking above and below the surface level. So thinking back to our iceberg analogy, often people focus too much on the tech behind the scenes or too much on the user experience front stage. And neither are good, because with the first, you're at risk of creating a tech-based solution that nobody wants, or with the latter, you're at risk of creating a beautiful experience, but it's technically unfeasible and not viable for the business, which isn't, neither of those situations are good for your projects. So really what service design is saying is what Alicia said right at the beginning around creating experiences that are great for those that they're targeted at, but also they create value for the business that's delivering them as well. So by covering all our bases, that helps us to do that.
Now, we flew through all of those and we realized that was really quick, and there's so much we could cover, as Nat mentioned before. You know, this can be from 2 days to 2 weeks or longer, and there's lots out there under service design. But in summary, it's all about understanding what people are thinking, feeling, and doing, and why they're doing it, most importantly. It's focusing on what people are trying to achieve, not only their challenges and how you help get them there. It's thinking like an entrepreneur, so it's framing those problems as opportunities and broadening out to understand what is actually possible. And it's about covering all your bases. So as Nat just said, it's thinking above and below the surface to really understand if your service could work and how it could best work, tying everything together as well. I think that's the summary of everything there. And I think it's about time that we actually heard your voice a bit more and had some Q&As.
I think we have some in the Q&A box. So I'm just gonna open that up now. Oops, went too far. Okay, so one of the questions, is your definition of services also appropriate for services designed for internal users, i.e. colleagues within an organization? So that's a really interesting question, because when we did the example that I gave at the start, where a technology team in a media company, that was all based around services that they were providing internally. So they were providing collaboration tools, ways for their staff to work better together, all of the kind of like devices and applications that they use to be able to do their jobs, sharing of information. So that was very much an internally focused project. And so with that, we did have a mixture of both services and, tangible and intangible elements. So the tangible was like the devices and the apps and the things like that. And then when we were looking at the culture and the ways of working, that was where some of the more intangible parts were coming in. So I do think it applies in that scenario as well.
Yeah, and I think that's where we alluded to earlier on, where it can get a bit muddy, and where Nat and I discussed it so much, because when it becomes those internal projects and what that looks like, how that definition as a service becomes a little bit trickier.
So just so you're all aware, I have both the Q&A and the chat open. So if you do put any questions in, I should be able to see them. So we've got another question from Jeremy. How do you think about organization design in the context of service design?
That's a really interesting one. And I think they have to sort of sit hand in hand. And I think sometimes separating them as definitions can be an interesting one as well. I think it's that holistic view. Again, it comes back to that point and how you incorporate that element into it. It's down to those people factors, those human factors that you need to consider as you're thinking about that organizational level. Because basically that is going to support the delivery of some of those different intangible and tangible solutions as well. Nat, I don't know if you have anything to add on that element too.
No, I think that was a really good answer. So I'm going to move us on, because we've got a few coming through. Kartikeya said, but don't you think closed-ended questions are really important, as it usually gives quantitative insights? I think that's a really great question. I feel like we're going to say that every time, because they're all great questions. I think that in more data-based formats like surveys and stuff like that, there's definitely value in having those quant insights as well. And we do try to have a good balance. But I guess for us, the whole idea around human-centered and people-centered and stuff like that, and empathy, that really comes out in the more qualitative and more exploratory questioning that open-ended questions allow us to have.
Yeah, and just to add to that point as well, I think it's always worthwhile, something we like to apply to projects is what you call like the data triangulation. So it's basically having 3 different models essentially of how you're gathering that data. So it might be your one-to-one interviews, it might be desktop research, and it might be sort of that immersion side of things. It's just adding more validity to what you're trying to understand and interpret as well. There was one here from Beth on the chat, which was around, oh, it's just gone down. How would you recommend getting started with service design in a company who doesn't have this arm in their design team yet? And I think that's a really good question, and something that we talk about a lot, because one important part for us is how do you build capability into teams as well. And so there's applying some sort of these techniques, like starting small, focusing it in bits of projects, small projects, but also sort of starting to introduce them where you're sharing a visual communication of it as well and making it visible to others. But it's also, if you have a design team already, it's sort of just broadening that thinking to that joined up effort. And so basically, if you start thinking about how you map out those journeys, or having the visibility of those journeys out on a wall somewhere, people start to get intrigued and they want to engage with that. And so it's actually kind of that visual storytelling that comes into it as well. I don't know if you have any other words of advice for that, Nat.
No, I thought that was fabulous. I've got a question from my dad, so I thought I'd better ask that. My dad says, any tips for engaging with a broad customer base without resorting to closed question surveys? Yeah, I think focus groups, inviting them in, actually like seeing people in person, whether that's yourself or, you know, someone else that can help you do that, is always going to be our version of the best alternative for that. I think sometimes what you need to do if your customer base is so broad is to think about how you might group those customer groups, and also to look at extreme users. So often you have like a scale of different type of customers, and you'll have ones that are kind of like the majority in the middle, and then you have extreme users with extreme needs at the other ends. We tend to categorize those in what we call personas, and when you focus on the needs of those extreme users, we tend to see that we meet those in the middle as well. I don't know if you'd add to that, Alicia? No,
that was awesome.
I found it really strange answering imagining my dad and answering that question there. So sorry if I floundered a little bit.
The dad in the chat. We've got a couple of minutes left, so I don't know if we
question here from Valerie of, do you have any tips on how one can transition from being a UX designer to a service designer?
Oh yeah, that's a really interesting one, and we've got a few of those in our team actually at Spark. I think it is it's a really great skill set to have that UX design element, and it's then I know a few people have got involved by using various online tools. There's whole sort of toolboxes that you can have access to. One of my go-to ones is this is Service Design Doing, which is really useful to kind of look at the UX level, but it takes you up to this next kind of level of methodologies of service design. And there's lots of courses you can go on as well, but it's essentially, I would just advise kind of looking at those various blogs and elements like that, and some of those books that kind of demonstrate how UX sits into it as well. So you don't feel like you're learning a whole new skill set. It's more just building on what you already have.
Cool. Are we out of time, Karen?
I think we are out of time, but that was absolutely brilliant session. Thanks so much for that. And we will be able to follow up on all the questions that have come through. So don't worry if you did submit one and we've not gone over it in this session, there will be a follow-up. So I just want to thank you both. I think it's probably one of my favourite sessions so far, which is great. I've finished now for the week, which is also great. So we have got lots more sessions running next week. So do check us out at bjss.com/leads. And yeah, great webinar. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Enjoy the rest of the festival.
Bye.
Bye.